Good morning, everyone. My name is Rich Sloma. Welcome to today's New York State Archives presentation of Ask Us Anything About Records Management Policies. Today's presenters are Jennifer O'Neill, Monica Hauck-Whealton, and Sarah Durling. The session is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat box to the right side of your screen and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. And now I will turn the webinar over to our presenters.
Thanks so much, Rich. Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's presentation or Ask Us Anything session about policies and procedures. Today, what we want is to help you get the answers that you need about creating policies and procedures, implementing them in your government, figuring out what you need, and figuring out how you can get started. So, today we have with us Jennifer O'Neill, the head of our Scheduling and State Agency Services. Want to say hi, Jennifer?
Good morning, everyone.
Yay! And Monica Hauck-Whealton, who is our Records Advisory Officer covering counties, libraries, and all those fun miscellaneous governments out there. Monica, tell the people hi.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Awesome. So how this is going to work is we have some questions pre-prepared. Some have been submitted, some of them we've come up with, that we're going to get started with just to get you kind of grounded a little bit. But after a couple of slides, I'm going to stop using the slide questions and check and see what questions y'all have submitted in the chat. Now, if you haven't found it yet, the chat is in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. It looks like a little cartoon word bubble. If you pop that open, you can type in whatever you want in there. And really, if you have questions about anything on this topic, please throw them in, because if you have a question about that, odds are somebody else has a question, and the answer would be really helpful to both of you. So, with that said, let us get going. Jennifer, why don't I throw this first one at you?
Sure.
What is the difference between a policy and a procedure?
So this is a great question to start us out. Policies and procedures form the foundation of any government or organization. Well-defined policies and procedures ensure that you have smooth and effective business processes, but many people use the term policy and procedure synonymously. So let's clarify what we mean by each of those terms. So a policy is a general rule that's required to be followed. It explains your organization's overarching principles and expectations. It sets direction, guides, and influences decision making, and really it points the way to a general goal that you wish to reach. It basically drives your procedures. You'll find that policies change fairly infrequently, and it answers the question, what do I need to know? A procedure, on the other hand, is a structured series of steps or actions that outline how a specific task or process should be performed to support the policy. It usually has a narrow focus and describes step by step what actions need to be taken in specific instances. And the level of detail is going to vary on a case by case basis. Unlike with policies, you'll find that procedures will change um, quite more frequently. And also, it tells employees how to do something, unlike a policy. So let's look at an example. So everyone is involved in employee recruitment. So your policy might be that your government ensures equal opportunities for all applicants during the recruitment process. Um, it may further state that no applicant should be discriminated against based on race, gender, nationality, religious beliefs, or other criteria. And you're following the law and regulations like you should, including federal civil rights law, and state human rights law. So that's your policy. So think about the procedures that would help support this policy. So you may have certain forms that the applicants need to fill out, like an application form. They may need to uh, send in their resume, their school transcripts, and your other procedures might revolve around conducting and completing interviews, checking references, conducting background checks, choosing a preferred candidate, and then getting approval from the person or group that you need to get approval for hires. So that should hopefully give you a general idea of what we mean when we talk about a policy and a procedure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Monica, how are policies and procedures different from program plans? I had heard someone say we needed one of those too.
Well, a program plan is a really great idea, but it is a step beyond what you have within your policies and procedures. As Jennifer said, the policy is essentially your statement of your goal. It says, this is what's important to us. And your procedures say, and these are the day-to-day activities that staff follow to make sure that we meet our goals within the policy. But a program plan is going to be more concerned with the development or improvement of your program. You're going to set goals associated with achieving the mission within the policy and provide details on specific projects that will be undertaken to meet those goals. So a program plan might be in response to a needs assessment or it might not. But Jennifer just gave an example of policies and procedures, and I'm going to give another one related to records management. Your policy might say that you're going to retain records in accordance with the relevant retention schedules. That's a very basic general statement. Your procedures will tell you how to assign retention requirements to records, and once the retention is no longer necessary, how to dispose of them appropriately. But your program plan, because it's a set project or idea of how to develop your program in alignment with the policy and procedures, may be where you set the nitty-gritty details and how you're going to utilize staff and resources to go through the backlog of poorly sorted records in offsite storage, organize them according to retention requirements, and weed out what's no longer needed. Your program plan, as opposed to your policy or procedures, might assign specific staff or identify needed resource or establish timelines for completion of that specific project.
Wow. It sounds like there's a lot of really intense thought that needs to go into some of these, huh? All right, Jennifer, why does my government need to have policies and procedures? I mean, what happens if we don't have them? Like, totally okay, right?
Good question, Sarah. So the main aim or aims of a policy are to reduce institutional risk and boost operational efficiency. With clear policies, employees at various levels in your government will understand what is expected of them. This will ensure consistency and promote a sense of predictability regarding what they can expect from others in your government. As we talked about, the purpose of procedures is to explain the how of completing a task. Procedures provide step-by-step instructions on how to complete a task, who's responsible for completing a particular step, and when it should be completed. So with these well-defined procedures, your employees will know what to do even when you can't supervise them directly. And it streamlines your operations with no room for ambiguity or confusion. Having defined procedures also ensures compliance with applicable laws and regulations. You're able to justify decisions you made regarding records and are able to point the public and the media to it as the reason, for example, when you destroy records in compliance with a retention schedule. You can also defend record keeping in court if you're required to explain how records were created and maintained. So many policies and procedures often tend to disappear or get forgotten about when there's a major staffing change. But if you have your policies and procedures in writing, it can be one way to make sure that they don't disappear. It also ensures that your successors can understand and carry on the work in your office.
And that's really important when you win the lottery and decide that you're moving to Florida. Monica, so what kind of policy should we have? I imagine there's a couple of them.
Well, if you really wanted to, and I'm not advising this, you could technically have one overarching policy stating that your office needs to abide by sound records management practices, but that's not going to give you a lot of detail, and it's not necessarily going to be something that staff find meaningful. So it's often makes more sense to create more refined policies related to different aspects of records management. So you might want to think about creating a policy for managing your active files and another for managing your inactive records because the process may be very different. You can also talk about whether you want to have one policy specifically for electronic records because there are a lot of details there that you need to consider that don't necessarily apply to your paper records. You can also think about creating a policy for how to dispose of records appropriately depending on what they are, what goes in the recycling bin, what needs to go to the shredder, what things you need to have a really tight chain of custody on. Or you might want to have a policy about the really fun and kind of challenging task of identifying which records have enduring historical value and how to preserve them to ensure an ongoing access. And if you've attended webinars or workshops that I've participated in before, you've probably picked up on my mild obsession with FOIL, audits, and legal requirements like subpoenas and discovery demands. It's a good idea to have a policy spelling out who is responsible for providing access to records in response to such events.
Wow, okay, cool. That is a lot to think about. We did get a question from someone asking if paper records could be destroyed after they're scanned. Is that something that should be in your policies?
The process of determining which records need to be maintained in paper format, even after they're scanned, or of determining that the electronic copy is the new official copy, that it accurately replicates the paper copy, and that is admissible in court, or for other purposes, is definitely something you should put into your policy and procedures because it's not as easy as it sounds. Like, for example, your procedures can reference the digital imaging guidelines from the archives, which spell out how to create files that are going to be useful, that are going to remain accessible for the full life of the record.
Cool, thank you. And while we're on the topic of questions being submitted, I just want to remind folks that we are asking you to throw your questions in the chat. If you haven't gotten it open yet, it is a little word balloon in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And please make sure that you're sending them to everyone because we want to make sure that you get the questions that you need answered. All right? All right, so Jennifer, does every policy have to have a corresponding procedure associated with it?
So this question has generated considerable debate. Some people say that there's only policies that require specific actions or processes need accompanying procedures. However, I would recommend that to ensure effective operations in your government, that you really should have both a policy and corresponding procedures. Procedures may lay out the steps involved, but you still need strong policies to establish the proper framework. Without policies, you will not understand your government's goals or the direction it travels. So I recommend, State Archives recommends having both.
Awesome. Thank you. Monica, what are things that make for a good or strong set of policies and procedures?
Well, while you want your policy and procedures to be something that you can whip out if there's ever a question of what your requirements are within an organization and to prove that you've met your obligations and you've thought about your obligations, like if there's litigation, if there's an audit or whatever, the really important thing is to make sure that it's a resource that staff can and will reference in the course of doing their jobs. And to be effective at that, not just making sure they look at it, but making sure they get the information they need when they do look at it. You're going to want to start by making sure that any policy clearly states what must be done, why it needs to be done that way, and who is responsible. After reviewing the policy or procedures, staff should know what they're obligated to do, why it's important, and who to contact for assistance or guidance. Policies and procedures should also be really practical. Make sure that the resource you're creating is something that staff will actually follow. You can do this by considering current processes and whether they can be incorporated as is or tweaked to better meet the records management goals. You can also think about current staff and their comfort level and willingness to be flexible. What are the easy asks? What will require convincing? And will staff need training? As you're developing procedures, you're going to want to think about the fact that while managing records should be a part of everyone's job, it's not their whole job. So how can you make it easy and incorporate into current processes? You're also going to want the resources you create to be easy to use and understand. Be clear and concise. Use language that makes sense to all staff, regardless of their prior records management experience. This is not the time to start using all the technical terms and acronyms that you've ever heard of or that you might use with your colleagues who work with records management every day. You're also going to want to make sure that any resource you create is skimmable. Use headings and bulleted or numbered lists to help staff quickly find the specific information that you need because they're not going to read it cover to cover when they need the answer to one question. And you're going to want to make sure that the document itself is approachable. While I'm not advocating for using Comic Sans and putting in, cute little images and jokes, you want to make sure that the document isn't scary because it's got huge blocks of tiny text or an authoritarian tone, and you're not going to want to weight readers down with unnecessary details. Stick to the information that they need to meet your records management goals. But while you want to be friendly and approachable, you also want your policies and procedures to be professional. You want it to be, an official document that comes down as instructions on how they do their jobs. And in addition to that, you're going to want to assume that it's eventually going to be read by someone in upper management who really doesn't have the same sense of humor that you do, or that it might be released someday to the public, the press, or even the governor's office. You're going to want to make sure that this is a professional document that meets the requirements of how we instruct staff on how to do things, but instructs in a way that staff are going to be able to absorb information and be willing to follow the requirements set within the documentation.
Oh man, Monica, does that mean I have to take out all the Garfield cartoons I just put in the draft I'm wielding?
I I think that those are all going to be rated G, so you might be able to slip one or two in, but you don't want to populate it too much with them, no.
All right. So it looks like we have some questions. Our first question is from Maria, who is one of our records advisory officers covering so many governments right now. She's got the New York City municipal agencies, she's got the villages, she's got fire districts, she's got cities. We're keeping her pretty busy. Her question is completing a records destruction authorization form necessary? What do you guys think?
It's a best practice. We are not going to twist your arm and put you in records management jail if you don't, but it's really going to save you a lot of heartache if you track destruction because you can show that you are following the retention requirements. You can show that if a document cannot be located, it's because it was destroyed and not because it was lost or because you're hiding it from people, which we would never do, but people accuse us of doing all sorts of things. And it can serve as a reference to staff going forward when they're, trying to, track down things in response to an audit.
And we do have a sample form available to you. I'm throwing a link to it in the chat. It is linked off of our forms and tools page. Let's see, our next question is from Thomas. Is there any reference that specifies what should be kept in paper form even after scanned?
We do have on our website under topics, we do have information on imaging and microfilming. Um, and it outlines there the requirements for what you need to do in order to successfully digitize records so that you can destroy them after scanning. So basically, you need to ensure that the digital copy remains accessible for the duration of its retention period. So for instance, and especially for permanent records, records that in the local government schedule are indicated for permanent retention, that's a pretty awesome responsibility to be able to ensure um, access to those digital records permanently. So for those, you should really carefully consider whether you may want to hold on to the originals in that case. You could certainly create digital copies for access purposes and backups, but you might want to consider holding on to the originals. For state agencies, if you have records that the retention schedule says to transfer them to the state archives, please do contact us, before you do destroy of any archival records, because we may have an interest in keeping the originals. There may be some, intrinsic value to them that would um, want that we would want to keep them. The other thing to consider is the Electronic Signatures and Records Act. There are certain records that still require handwritten signatures. So I would check that out to just make sure before you go ahead and destroy any originals.
There are also certain types of records that you just really do have to keep in paper format because the, regulatory authority that issues them or has oversight of the program that they relate to require you to do so. A great example is vehicle titles. If you have vehicles that are owned by your government entity that you use in the course of business and you want to be able to surplus them when they're no longer needed, you need to have a copy of that paper title. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you're a local government, any records from prior to 1910, before destroying the paper copy, even if you've scanned it, you need to get the approval of the state archives. So don't hesitate to contact the regulatory entities that you work with, the oversight agencies that may have an opinion on whether you need to keep that in hard copy. Because while it's kind of rare, there are types of records like the vehicle titles that you do need to have in hard copy. And don't worry, be afraid to talk to your counsel or talk to archive staff about whether there is a special requirement for that type of record. We might not know everything, but we can point you in the right direction.
Great, thank you so much, both of you. Um, so scanning and destroying records seem to be a hot topic today. Our next question comes from Anna. Can you please review the requirements that need to be followed in order to develop a policy whereby printed records can be destroyed after imaging?
Well, we have a bunch of really great resources that you can reference when you're writing your policy and just pull content straight from them. This past December, we had a webinar about digital imaging. We also have the digital imaging guidelines posted to our website. But in brief, you're going to want to make sure that any records that you're imaging are in a format that's going to remain accessible for the full retention period, that's probably going to be something that's non-proprietary. We tend to advise you use a PDF or a PDF-A for something that's going to last for 10 years or longer, or TIFF format. You're going to want to use a format that's not lossy so that, and I don't think I want to get into that here, but basically you want to make sure that when you save the file, it contains all the information that you need to recreate that record without having to reference external sources. And you're going to want to make sure that it's in a resolution. That means that you're going to be able to view that document. But more importantly, you're going to want to make sure that you verify that any digital copy you create accurately replicates the paper copy, and that the digital copies are named and filed and stored and backed up and migrated such that you are able to access them for the full retention period. But definitely look at the digital imaging guidelines, look at the webinar on that topic, and contact records management staff here at the archives, and we can help you.
And I threw in links to the resources that Monica mentioned it in the chat. Our next question is from Gabe. I work for a historical society and we have a collections management policy. It is currently out of date. My question is, what should be in a collections management policy?
So I would suggest that you take a look at the Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services website that the state archives is affiliated with. They have some great information about what should be in collections management policies. They also have some links to, for instance, the Museum Association of New York has some sample collections management policies on linked to off of their website. There's also links to other historical society and library websites that you can take a look at. So, go to the State Archives website, look for Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services, also called DIPSNIs, and you should find some good information about collections management policies there.
Awesome, thank you. See what else we got going on here. I work, this is from Jessica, in a school district public library. How should we look at these issues the same and differently? We currently do have a public access to records policy, records retention and removal policy, and request for confidential library records policy, but we don't have separate procedures to go with them.
Well, I'm going to let you chime in after me, Sarah, since you work directly with school district records. But what it comes down to is you're a government entity and you are held to, similar standards to other government entities, whether it's a city, a town, a water authority, a state agency, or whatever. And you want to make sure that staff understand what they're required to do to, allow them to access content so that they can do their jobs. And also to keep your, school district out of hot water if there's a request for records that are within their retention requirements. Sarah, since you work more closely with school districts, can you think of anything that would be different for them as an entity from other government entities?
Not necessarily, other than you do have to be aware that you are going to be dealing with records relating to kids that are going to be subject to FERPA, which restricts access to that the information, record information related to kids outside of generally their specific parent and family, and a few exceptions where those records are needed by specific institutions and individuals. So you do want to be aware of all the laws and regs that are going to affect the records that you hold. And take those into consideration. I mean, if you do have policies, do those policies kind of double as your procedures? Do you already have those built in? Or is that something where pulling out your procedures might be a good choice because you can update them more easily without having to overhaul the entire document? Sometimes you'll find that if you've got a policy and procedure document where it's all one thing, people get hung up on updating the policy part of it when really it's just the procedure that needs to be overhauled because something changed. Your workflow changed within your organization. Um, Breaking them apart can sometimes help ameliorate that issue because you don't have people focusing on the policy part, which they might have some concerns about, but doesn't really need to be updated as opposed to the procedure part that really needs to have the directions on how you do something change so that it is currently done correctly. Let's see, what else do we have? We have a lot of questions. I'm very excited. Thank you, folks. From Anna, are there templates available that show sample policies and procedures? We are a community college.
We do have samples. If you go to the State Archives website, go to the Records Management menu item, and then go to Topics, you'll see a topic on policies and procedures. And on that web page, we have a heading that says Sample Policies and Procedures. We have some sample records management policies, one for state agencies and one for local governments. And we also have some sample policies that we make available in our developing a policy for managing email publication. And I know that for state agencies and local governments, we do collect sample policies where we run across them from those governments and can share those with people on request.
Yes, please take copies of go out to our website and grab copies of our sample policies and procedures and rip them up and use them as you need to. They are meant for you to build your own off of. From Jessica, if we want to work with Family Search and have records scanned and shared by them, what do we need to do to follow requirements by the state?
Um, hmm. So this at the state archives, we've had a number of our records scanned and made available through Ancestry, which is obviously similar to Family Search. I think, one of the biggest things that we needed to do was to make sure that if there was any confidential information, that we redacted that before sharing it, um, because obviously you don't want that to go out to the public. Um, you may also want to think about in your contract requiring that Family Search provide you with those digital copies because it might be helpful for you to hold on to those digital copies as a backup um, uh, or as your record copy. So if that's the case, you may want to require that they um, at least comply with the minimum requirements that are indicated in the in the archive's digital imaging guidelines.
Yeah. And I mean, if you have questions about that and you want to email the archives, let me throw that email in our box and have questions for us. We can refer those to the folks who are involved in that project and see if we can get you some answers more specific to what your needs would be. We have a question from Danielle. I am working on updating our LGS1 spreadsheet specific to files we keep within our personnel records for our public school. Yay, office schedules. Is there someone I can send it to have them review for accuracy and help fix any we are unsure of? Hey, guess what? Danielle, my name is Sarah. I am the Records Advisory Officer for school districts, and I would be more than happy to help you with that. And if I have questions where I get stuck, I'm going to go pester Jennifer because Jennifer knows all the answers to everything. So let me throw my email address in the chat and you can send that to me and I will be more than happy to take a look at that for you. From Carol, regarding the special ed records, do we need to save the miscellaneous papers in the file like the home language forms? Normally we wouldn't save them, but recently the special ed department asked us for this. They said said during an audit it was asked for. I happen to have it because a student was in file bound, and whoever called it last year copied it in file bound.
Well, I'm going to jump in and really quickly because I remember working on the retention requirements for this one. Home language questionnaires and English language proficiency identification assessment results are covered by LGS 1 item 948B as in boy. And those are retained for 6 years after the student graduates or would normally have graduated from high school.
So if they were still within the retention period that you should have had them. We don't specify how you organize your files because everybody does it a little differently. It makes sense for everybody a little differently according to how they function within their government. So you you should have been able to find them wherever you were storing them. It doesn't necessarily need to be in that specific file that you were looking in, though. That makes sense. All right, from Corey, when scanning paper files, is it a good idea to save in more than one format? And also, are there ideas on where to store backup files of the scanned files that are already saved?
Well, if you take a look at our digital imaging guidelines, we do have guidance in there on, as Monica mentioned, having using a like preservation format and like TIFF or PDFA. And then also there are access formats. So those would be for the copies that you're regularly and routinely using on a regular basis. And those tend to be smaller sized files. So that might be one approach that you take, having preservation copies and access copies. In terms of storing backup files, um, especially given some of the climate issues that are going on, it's a good idea to have a backup, um, with plenty of geographic distance from your office. So a lot of governments are now using the cloud, and so the cloud will have redundant storage at various geographic locations. So that's a good option. Or maybe you develop some sort of agreement with another government that's located, a distance away to share backup files or upload back backup files. So those are some options.
Okay, and our last question so far is from Yvette. I work for the New York City Department of Probation. We are doing a complete redo of our retention schedule. Is there a records advisor for criminal justice agencies?
There's a records advisory officer for New York City mayoral agencies. And if you're a mayoral agency, you get to work with our colleague Maria McCashin, who is so sharp, and you're going to love working with her. And Sarah, can you put Maria's contact information in the comments?
On it.
Thank you.
So that looks like what we've got so far. I really appreciate all the questions folks are throwing in there. I love the enthusiasm. We're going to hit a couple more of the slide questions, and please keep throwing them in the chat if you have them. We've got another 20 minutes so far. All right, so this one is for Jennifer. What are the things we should avoid including in the policies and procedures?
So the biggest thing and biggest mistake people make is mixing up policies and procedures putting both that information into one document. And it's really easy to do. I've done it myself. Um, so, make sure that you're keeping them separate so that it avoids confusion. And also by keeping them separate, it will make it easier to update your policies and procedures. Um, it's also good to have, and I'm just reiterating some of the things Monica already said, that your policies and procedures are clear and easy for everyone to read, regardless of their role and background. Try to avoid putting in any jargon, abbreviations, or complex phrasing. Just use straightforward language. Try not to be too wordy. Um, Edit your policy to reduce any unnecessary or redundant information so that you increase the likelihood of people reading your policy. Try not to use employee names, but rather refer to tasks by titles or positions because, as you know, staff turnover and that will reduce the need to update your policy every time a staff person leaves. Also, be aware of the meaning of words. So if it's a required action, use a word like must. If it's not a requirement, then you can use a word like should. Also avoid information that's inconsistent with other policies and procedures, and similarly, avoid inaccurate or out-of-date information.
Great, thank you. All right, Monica, this is a question that troubles many people. Okay, but how do we create policies? Where do we even start?
Okay, before we get into this, I gotta admit, I love writing policies and procedures, and it's not because I'm unusually bossy or anything like that. The great thing about policies and procedures is that they're an opportunity to sit down and really think about what your goals are and the best ways to achieve them, given, the limitations in office time, resources, and available staffing. So when I'm writing a policy or procedures, I like to start by creating a list of topics that need to be covered. And your list doesn't have to be exhausted, just write things down as you think of them. Then, once I have a good starter list, I pick one item as a starting point. It can be something that's a high priority or something that's really important for staff new to records management to understand, or it might be a response to a question that you get asked all the time. But the really important thing is that when you're starting out, you start with something that you already know about. It might be something where you already have a procedure in place that has been memorialized, or you just really have strong opinions about how it should be done. But what you shouldn't do is start with something that requires a bunch of research. Because when you're starting a new project, it's so, so important to give yourself an easy win at first. You can develop your writing style, figure out how you're going to, complete this process and figure out the kinks that you're going to hit as you're writing a policy and procedure and, how you're going to address them. And once you've developed a decent draft policy and procedure, you can move on to the next one. Or if you're working on something, you get flummoxed, you aren't quite sure what the answer to something is, or you haven't worked out quite the minutiae yet, you should feel free to leave blanks and come back. It's all about making sure that you get information down on paper. And you can always, write down a, basic outline, realize you've hit a bump in the road, and then think about it for a little bit, put it in the back of your mind or talk to a colleague, but you shouldn't let that, bring you to a hard stop. Just try to get information down on the paper, try to get your ideas flowing, and make sure that you don't get, caught up in, minutia and come to a halt.
That is awesome advice. Jennifer, can we hire a consultant to write these for us?
Yes, you can hire a consultant to write your policies and procedures, and there are some benefits to doing that. They bring experience and expertise in policy development and are up to date on best practices and requirements, particularly in areas that would commonly be found across government, like human resources and financial services. Um, as an outsider too, they may bring some fresh perspective and may be able to suggest improvements to your processes. And while it can be a good avenue to take, consultants may be expensive, and they may be seeking long-term engagements. Just keep in mind that you can't rely on consultants solely to develop policies and procedures. They're going to need to meet with you and your staff to discuss your operations and identify any current policies and procedures you have in place. In addition, affected program staff, management, and legal staff will need to carefully review draft policies and procedures that they prepare to make sure that they are accurate and accurately reflect your processes. And then your executive and board, whoever makes approvals of such things, will need to approve them.
Good deal. Monica, what are the most important policies that we need to have?
Well, if I had to choose, I'd say the most important policies are the ones that either help keep you out of legal hot water or prevent your office from having to drop everything and scramble to recreate content vital to your work. So that's going to be the policies that ensure that records are kept as long as the minimum retention requirements. Those are things like applying retention schedules and making sure you're backing up your e-records. And then you're going to want to think about the policies that help prevent inappropriate access to your active, inactive, or disposed records. And finally, if I'm, trying to think of what policies I have to create in a hurry, I'd focus on the policies that make sure appropriate access can be granted quickly. Those are going to be the ones that establish who's responsible for maintaining a copy, where it's kept, and how to request or retrieve it when necessary.
That sounds really reasonable. Jennifer, is there a specific format we should follow when it comes to creating a policy or procedure?
So we recommend that you develop a template, mostly for consistency's sake. And you can take a look at our sample policies. Those are pretty fancy in terms of formatting. It doesn't have to be that fancy. But here are some basic elements for you to consider using within your template. Um, so it may be helpful to use letterhead to make it official, but somehow identify your government. You could assign a unique number, like a policy number. It's a good idea to put a summary of the policy right up front, along with any definitions or a glossary that might help to people to understand the meaning of some of the terms that are being used. And then you'll have the meat of your policy, the policy statement and responsibilities. You may want to have references in a separate on a separate page to applicable laws, regulations. It's a good idea to also include some administrative information about when the policy was approved and by who, the date of the particular version, the date of the next revision of the policy, and who the policy owner is and their contact information. Um, uh, that's those are all helpful elements to include in the policy. If you do put all your policies together into a manual, you may want to use headings and subheadings and a table of contents, especially if it's a longer document. So yeah, check out our sample policies on our website that we talked about before for if you want to see um, what those elements look like within a template.
Great, thank you. I think it was Jennifer who alluded to this earlier, but Monica, who should we talk to when we're creating policies and procedures?
Well, the good news is that coming up with policies and procedures isn't something you should or have to do on your own. So what you're going to want to do is first take a sampling of the staff who create, receive, and manage the records. They are the subject matter experts on how they use those records and why they're important. You need to understand what they're currently doing with them and why it does or doesn't work. They'll also be a great sounding board for your ideas about the ideal policy or solutions. Whenever I write a policy or procedure, I assume that at least one reviewer is going to tell me, you know what, Monica, that's a really great sounding idea, but it's not going to work because of X or Y reason. You know, maybe I don't understand a process fully, or maybe I don't know the personalities of all the impacted staff and have overestimated their willingness to go along with what I proposed. Or maybe I got so excited about my proposed process that I overlooked some pretty major flaws or left huge informational gaps because I assumed that everyone would have make the same leaps of logic that I did. You can also talk to records management experts outside of your organization. Ask staff at other state agencies or local governments that that you work with. What are they doing? What works for them? What doesn't? Another great option is, as always, to contact State Archive staff. We're here to give you advice on how to manage your records, and we can have talked to other government entities and about what challenges they faced, and we may be able to give you insights on what will work best for you. And then, of course, you're going to want to make sure that you get input from management within your organization. Do they support the actions that you're asking staff to take? If not, what can you do to alleviate their concerns? Because if management's not on board, staff aren't going to be able to follow the guidelines that you provide to them or are going to be challenged when they try to do so. So you want to make sure that management not only agrees with what you're doing, but agrees that it's a way that staff should be spending their time.
Okay. Jennifer, where should we put these things when we're done with them?
Good question. So you'll want to store your finalized policies and procedures in a central location where staff and others have access. So this could be on your local area network, SharePoint, on your website, especially if this is a policy that you want to share with the public. Or there's also policy management software available that you may also consider. For policies or project specific, or policies or procedures specific to a project or application, you may also want to stick a copy of the policy in that same folder for ready reference, or add pointers to the central location, um, just to make it easy for people to find. But you'll want to make it easy to find and use your policies and procedures by having clear naming and numbering conventions for different versions you have and different policies, um, and also provide some sort of search and browse tools. Some are automatically embedded in some of like in the LAN or SharePoint or website, but you'll want to make it easy for people to find your policies and procedures by putting them in a central location.
Oh man, you mean I can't make it like a whole hide and seek egg hunt for folks? I've got to make sure that they can find them?
That's ideal.
All right. So Monica, our next question is, does my government need to formally adopt these policies and procedures?
Well, like so many things in life, this really depends on your organization and its norms. Formally adopting policy and procedure can be just an awesome way of showing that your exec management, your board, whoever, is the big upper management folks within your organization are aware of the policy and procedures and that they support it. Showing that they are behind this and that they have signed off on it as something that is appropriate and important can help ensure that the policy and procedures will be disseminated to all staff, including new hires, and can be a great argument for scheduling periodic mandatory training. But that said, you may decide not to go through a formal adoption process. Maybe that's just not what they do in your office. Or you might formally adopt the policy, but not the associated procedures if they're two separate documents. I've worked in places where we did exactly that. While the policies are general and updated infrequently, as Jennifer touched on earlier, procedures are more likely to evolve over time. If your policy emphasizes the need to follow the associated procedures, it might not be necessary to officially adopt the procedures themselves. What it comes down to is whether the, upper management, the board and whatnot, want to review that before it's released and sign off on it, or whether they want to point staff to you as the subject matter expert when it comes to all things records management.
Cool. Jennifer, how often do these policies need to be updated?
This is another question that has a considerable debate about it. Um, Obviously, policies and procedures should grow and change with your government because laws and requirements are going to change. You should plan to review and update your policies at least once a year. I've seen people also say, like, maybe you don't need to do it every year, um, but certainly you need to do it on a regular basis. Um, you also may not want to wait for a finite period of time to update your policies and procedures. So, for instance, if you have a significant organizational change, like you have a new program unit or department that's created, um, if you know about changes to laws and regulations that will impact your policy or procedures, or if there's been an incident that's occurred or a policy violation that's brought to your attention, maybe some um, necessary changes that need to be made to your policy, those are some good examples of times in which you'll want to revisit your policy without waiting for that year to roll around. Your government can be at risk if information and policies and procedures is updated. Um, and if this is the case, you may be carrying out actions that are no longer consistent with applicable laws, or staff, if they see your policy is out of date, may simply elect to disregard it. But that could place you in legal jeopardy. So you'll want to make sure that you're updating it regularly. And if you keep your policies and procedures in a digital format, that makes it even easier to update them.
Great, thank you. All right, Monica, this is the last question I think we have time for. How does my government get staff to follow the new policies and procedures? Because strangely, I want them to do that. You may be muted. All right, we are not hearing anything from Monica. And Jennifer, do you want to take a crack at this one?
Sure. Um, so obviously you need to make staff aware of the policies and procedures. I think that's the most obvious step. So it's a good idea to send out information to staff through email, maybe multiple emails to make them aware of the policies and procedures. You may also,
I'm
oh,
sorry,
no,
I was
go ahead.
muted. And you're saying exactly what I was saying, Jennifer.
We'll
It's
take it away.
I apologize, but yes, it's so important for staff to understand there's something they're expected to do. It can take the form of an announcement, an email distribution, mandatory or on-the-fly training. You're also going to want to make sure that the explanations are clearly explained in the policies and procedures, as well as any outreach efforts. You should do your level best to make sure that you're approachable and available, or that there are approachable and available subject matter experts within your office. Make it as easy and unscary as possible for staff to ask questions about the new requirements. And you should make sure that management are informed and on board, because it doesn't matter if staff understand that records management is part of their job if their supervisors don't encourage or support the use of staff time to ensure that the policy and procedures are followed. And as Jennifer said, if staff do not, notice the policy and procedures are outdated, they may decide not to follow it. Or if they think that it's just not meeting, really meeting their needs, they may not follow it. So you need to show willingness to update the policy and procedures based upon concerns raised by staff. You spoke to, select stakeholders when drafting content, but now you've opened up that documentation for review by a much larger audience. And showing that you care about getting things done appropriately more than you do about making sure that your dream process is followed simply because it was your dream process is going to make staff more willing to work with you. You need to be pragmatic and make sure that you're, meeting the goal, even though if you're not necessarily doing it exactly the way you thought you would, because that's going to greatly increase your chances of a successful rollout. And Jennifer, since you were so kind to step in when I had myself on mute, do you have anything to add?
I think that is a very complete answer.
Great, thank you both. So we are going to skip right to the end. We want to make sure that you feel free to reach out to us whenever you have questions. Our job is to help make your job when it comes to managing records better, easier, faster, stronger. So, we provide advice, retention question answers, and training on how to do records management of a variety of stripes. That's our email address there at the bottom of the page. Please feel free to send us any questions that you have. And for our lovely host, Rich, if there are multiple folks sitting in on you with you today on this presentation, if you could throw that in the chat so we just have the numbers, that would be greatly appreciated. And ladies, anything you want to say as we close?
No, thank you everyone for taking the time to attend this presentation today.
And I just want to say that we just advised you to be approachable and just people ask questions. I hope that we were very approachable today, and please don't hesitate to contact us with your questions because this is why we are here and we would love to talk to you.
All right, thank you everyone. Have a great day.